So today is the subject's bullying in the workplace. I'm Julie Ban. If you not met me before, the partner at Sharpe Pritchard, and this is January's session of Sharpe Minds. We've got Kit here today who's going to keep an eye on the chat for me if anyone's got any questions. The session is being recorded, and so if you have any questions, if you could leave them to the end and you want to talk through the question, then we can stop the recording at the end and we can go through that. Otherwise, if you put them in the chat box, then we can answer them anonymously as it is. So the reason why I've chosen this topic is twofold. The first is that we're getting an increasing number, I would say, of allegations that are coming through, grievances that getting through to the tribunal of bullying, and bullying going down the chain from manager to a member of staff, or from going up the chain that managers feel bullied, or less so, I would say, at the moment. Colleagues are bullying each other, but it is a topic. It is a definition that is put to is very vague, and it is put and is given to describe a whole range of different behaviour, and it's really difficult for you to pinpoint whether someone actually has been bullied. The second reason is that over the summer, a Labour MP brought a motion to bring in a freestanding claim in the Employment Tribunal to argue that you've been bullied, so you don't have to resign in order to bring that. So I wanted to cover those points. So let's look. So I'm going to look at the current legal framework, then we're going to look at this proposed freestanding claim, and then any safeguards you as an organisation can take to try and avoid claims. So the current legal framework, so it's quite complex. There's no single piece of legislation that deals with workplace bullying. So you can look first of all at the Equality Act. And that's where a lot of employees start and define the behaviour that they are concerned with or aggrieved with as harassment related to a protected characteristic. Now, if you've been faced with these, which I'm sure many of you have experienced, then you'll know that it's actually you will receive claims where someone is alleging harassment, and they give a litany of examples of behaviour, and then they say it is because of my race, my sex, my disability, and there appears to be no connection whatsoever between the behaviour, the content of the behaviour, and the actual protected characteristic. But that doesn't stop an individual pursuing the claim, bringing it to a tribunal, forcing you to defend the claim over 3 up to 7 days to get the answer to that, and so there is something to be said in relation to looking at that again in more detail. The second is the Employment Rights Act, and looking particularly at detriment provisions. So the employee would say, I've been subject to a detriment because I have done something. The obvious one is whistleblowing. It could be because of raised health and safety concerns. It could be because I have asserted my statutory rights. It could be because I've asserted my rights to family-friendly provisions such as maternity leave. It could be a variety of things, and they're all set out very clearly in the Employment Rights Act. And again, the employee has a burden of proving that actual behaviour is because of what they've done previously. And then you've got the obvious one, which is the traditional route where an employee resigns and claims constructive unfair dismissal, and they argue that the employer, by their actions, a series of actions usually, have breached the implied term of trust and confidence. So they've treated them in such a way as it would be intolerable, it's undermined the working relationship, and it'd be intolerable to continue working for them. Finally, I've added the criminal and civil provisions under the Protection of Harassment Act 1998. We don't see these very often, to be honest, because the burden of trying to show that you've been subject to harassment under this legislation is much higher. It does involve a level of fear for one's safety, which is much, much harder to actually show. So what do we mean by bullying? So ACAS have defined, I mean, everybody tries to define it, don't they? If you Google it, there's hundreds of different definitions, but we'll go through ACAS, which is our standard of good practice, and they argue it amounts to offensive, intimidating, malicious, insulting behaviour and abuse or misuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. So it could be just a single act or repeated incidents across a wide spectrum of behaviour. It can range from extreme forms of intimidation like physical violence, which is very rare in the workplaces that we work with, to more subtle forms like an inappropriate joke, banter, we like to refer it to, ignoring somebody, leaving them out of meetings, undermining them in public forums. So, as I say, these are examples that have come up. So, giving people meaningless tasks, persistent and unwanted criticism. Now, I'm not sure why it's referred to as unwanted criticism, because I'm not entirely sure anybody actually wants criticism, but that's how it's been defined. Unreasonable pressure about job performance, and that's difficult, isn't it? Because it's real subjective. What is unreasonable pressure? Public humiliation, by that as in putting people down in team meetings, ignoring them, that sort of thing. Shouting or heated arguments, which is very difficult if somebody is particularly belligerent to you. So raised voices or tone and language used. Again, it's really difficult for you as an employer to investigate those, to investigate what a tone was or what the context was that meant that a particular conversation amounted to bullying. Isolation or exclusion from work or social activities. Manipulation of roles, scapegoating and setting you up to fail, which I think is probably very similar to scapegoating, isn't it? But all of them are about someone's perception. So it's all very subjective, and it's very difficult to know whether, when you're investigating a matter, whether someone's reasonably believes that they've been subject to treatment that went beyond what amounts to reasonable and goes within the definition of bullying. It's unlikely to be overt behaviour. It's unlikely to be that obvious that other people have concerns about it. But what I do find, and what the risk is to employers, is the allegations are often come up in a retaliatory manner. So you are taking someone through a performance management process, and the response to that is, well, I'm being bullied by my manager, that the way that they treat me is undermining me, etc. It could be you're taken through a disciplinary process. It could be a sickness management process, and often these allegations come up in that way. And it's human nature, isn't it, that if these issues were so serious, then you would think, well, the person would have raised them anyway. They've only raised them because we are dealing with their behaviour, and therefore sometimes those allegations aren't treated quite as seriously, or are treated in the way that, in that context, the retaliatory, so that it's sort of a tit for tat situation. So, looking at this freestanding claim, so Rachel Maskell in July 2023 presented this Bullying and Respect at Work bill. So the aim is to provide a statutory definition of bullying at work. You would have the right to bring a claim in the Employment Tribunal relating to workplace bullying, and to provide a Respect at Work code which sets a minimum standards for positive and respectful work environments. Now, it's really difficult to see why there is a need for a Respect at Work code, because most things that would go in a Respect at Work code would be general practice anyway. Most employers would have a code of values or a code of conduct, and most would say, well, they do respect employees in the workplace, and therefore it's likely just to add another sort of checklist, another sort of policy within your policies. It may be that you already cover it off anyway, but what it would be used for if this bill got passed is sort of a tick box exercise for employment tribunals to look at what you are doing in more detail and see whether you can justify your any decisions made. The aim would also be to give the European Commission of Human Rights to investigate, give them the power to investigate workplaces and organisations where there's evidence of a culture or multiple instances of bullying, and to take enforcement action. Now, that in itself I don't think is a bad idea if obviously the Commission had sufficient funding to sort of commission further investigations. But the difficulty is of looking at the evidence of culture of bullying and how they'd actually make their findings as to who to investigate. So the MP, Rachel Maskell, argued that bullying is pervasive and widespread, and used research that suggested that 15% of the workforce have experienced it at work. But again, that's subjective, isn't it? Because 4.9 million people say, well, at some point they feel that they've been bullied. Doesn't necessarily mean that 4.9 million people, if you look at it objectively as a reasonable person, would think that that behaviour was bullying. It is probably a matter of fact that it causes stress and anxiety at the work, and it therefore costs UK businesses 28 billion a year in loss of productivity or cost of sick leave and things like that. And I think that is one of the key statistics that potentially we should look at in deciding if there's anything more you could do to create a workplace where you avoid such claims. So this bill is expected to get a second reading in June. I don't know if it will do, bearing in mind that there's potentially an election on the horizon this year at some point, and a lot of things might get pushed to one side pending what happens with that. But what we could say is that in relation to this is that if there is a change of government, which everyone seems to think that is quite possible this year, then Labour are usually more pro-employee, and this type of bill might get more credibility at that time. So it is something that potentially we should look at whether we can start planning to make changes now to avoid claims coming through. But whatever happens, you've still got the framework of claims that people can already make, so it's always a good thing to review. So the proposal is for a bullying definition that has the subjective test, so it's the impact on the individual, but has an objective element. So could the behaviours reasonably be considered malicious, offensive, intimidating or humiliating? I mean, the difficulty is that it's only really probably malicious that is objective. All the other things are actually subjective to that particular individual. So it's really difficult to see how this definition will work in practice any more than what we already have and what you all probably already have within your own internal policies. So the other proposal is that the time limit to bring a claim would come within the same time limit for the protection of harassment. So you'd have a 6-month limitation period to bring a claim. That in itself causes some key difficulties for an employer, because we already have claims where the time limit is 3 months, but people bring claims that they argue amounts to a course of conduct over a much longer period of time. And the difficulty for the employer is the evidential burden of trying to defend such matters where somebody's relying on a conversation that took place 6 months ago, where the other participant in that conversation can't even remember what was said. And so that in itself, I think, is an issue. Obviously the issue they'd extend the code of practice to bring this respect at work in. But and if you fail to comply with the respect at work, I think the proposal is that there would be the potential to increase any compensation should the claim succeed, and as I say, extended the powers of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So what what was highlighted when putting forward this bill was that bullying could be organisational. So it could be deliberate procedural delays in grievance management that cause harm. Now, we've all been involved in cases or witnessed cases or experienced them in some way where there have been quite substantial delays in dealing with a grievance or a flexible working request I've seen quite recently, or dealing with a disciplinary matter or a sickness management process or a performance management process. So those sorts of delays in making decisions, there is ample evidence that the tribunal consider could amount to unfair treatment. So that's the first point. The MP highlighted that bullying springs from a power imbalance. So a positional from a manager, it could be psychological or it could be relational. But I think that's not always the case, and we've certainly seen evidence of managers feeling undermined by their direct reports, which would also fit neatly within the definition of bullying. It can be direct or through a third party. It can be with intent or without, although remorse can be the judge of this, but it's very difficult to be remorseful if you didn't intend it and you don't believe that it actually had that impact. So that is something to bear in mind. So if we look at this from your perspective, so what are the risks of bullying allegations to your organisation? So the first thing that comes out when you look into this is that people are too afraid to challenge inappropriate behaviour or choose not to challenge it immediately. So what happens is you then get this course of conduct, which is then relied on later down the line if there is a final straw or there's something that is to the individual's advantage. If you think negatively, like I do on these matters sometimes, and it then comes out, and then people say, I was too afraid to challenge the inappropriate behaviour. So that's the first thing. What can you do as an organisation to ensure that that isn't happening in your workplace? The other is tolerance of others' beliefs and different opinions. Now, this is obviously in the forefront at the moment. There's a very toxic debate hammering around the workplace and through the employment tribunals in connection with gender critical beliefs and the trans community and trans rights, that show potentially on both sides of the spectrum there's an intolerance of others and beliefs and different opinions, different rights. It can result in an increase in sick leave, stress at work, anxiety, which, as I say, causes difficulties in terms of productivity. It puts impacts on other people in the team and causes financial loss in terms of sick leave. And it destabilises teams and creates conflict. As soon as there is a grievance, you may have to speak to other members of the team. You have to raise it with the manager. Those workplace relationships are never the same again. And very rarely the same again anyway, unless the manager holds their hands up and says, I am really sorry, I got it wrong, what can I do? And is willing to front that out. And that's not really how human nature works, is it? So I also think there's a misunderstanding of what is bullying by employees, and it is misused term, frequently misused term, for what could actually be reasonable management behaviour. So managing, robust management of performance, robust management of sick leave, robust management of lateness, robust discussions in meetings, and these allegations often surface. But how do you define a robust management, and in the context of somebody who potentially is more sensitive and needs managers to be more supportive? And I think that's something for you to look at in terms of manager training. Formalised and often strict use of policies often escalates tension. So if the only way for somebody to get this to stop is to raise a formal grievance, then that escalates the tension. More allegations surface. It becomes a tit for tat type of situation and increases the number of claims you get. I also think the increased use in the workplace of informal means of communication, such as email or Teams chat or WhatsApp messages, can create misunderstandings because people don't necessarily use the same formalities or think about what they are writing when they send such matters, and so it can be taken out of context quite easily. So how do you prevent bullying? So I think in looking at this, I thought the one way of looking at this is to look at first what makes a workplace enjoyable, and then what can you do to ensure you have that? Because if somebody enjoys work and enjoys working in their workplace, they're less likely to bring such claims. So we look if you look at different surveys on this, you've got a reasonable attitude to working hours. Now, sometimes overtime is necessary, but if a company applies too much pressure on their employees, so employees feel that they regularly have to put in long hours to keep up, that won't foster a happy workforce. Supportive colleagues. Now, we work for long periods of our lives, and so having colleagues are often seen as friends and, akin to family in some ways. So it's essential you can get along respectfully. A hostile working environment with backstabbing or finger pointing is a stressful place to be, and that it often is the result of high management expectations, so people start blaming others for loss in productivity. Transparent communication. So openness is the key to communication in the workplace. So employees need to be able to feel like there are ways to express themselves comfortably and know that their opinions are valid. Equally, when companies are transparent with their employees, job satisfaction tends to improve. And we often find in redundancy situations or claims that go through the tribunal dealing with that sort of thing, one of the key arguments is, I didn't know what was happening, or I wasn't told about this job or that job. I wasn't told what the issues were. I didn't understand what I needed to do to improve, or I didn't understand what the job entailed when I took it on in the first place, that sort of thing. Focusing on training and development. So some form of ensuring that people feel that they've got the necessary tools for progression. So you have an idea that everybody can grow and develop and within the workplace, and you're open to promoting and supporting people to do so. And no one will deny they enjoy being recognised in the workplace, and some need that more than others. And it's sort of looking at how you reward hard work. It might be a case of simple compliments. It may be getting feedback. It may be through performance-related pay. So, if you consider it from an employee's perspective, ERCAS suggests if you're an employee, you should ask the following questions of yourself to determine whether the way you're treated is being acceptable or not. So has there been a change in management or organisational style to which you need time to adjust? Is it a new manager or work requirements? Is there a organisational statement of standards of behaviour that you can consult? And we've been in a number of tribunal claims recently where individuals have said that they didn't know of codes of conduct. They weren't aware of such things happen. Where they were. Now, I don't for one moment believe that is the case, because most organisations now have quite hefty staff handbooks. It's on your intranet, it's all over the place. But having regular updates in terms of expectations is a really good idea. This is a real key thing. Do you have someone you can talk to about your worries? It could be a line manager, supervisor, union rep, personnel manager, or colleagues. You can share your concerns in a confidential way without it being escalated to a complaint. You can talk to somebody and say, is it reasonable for me to feel that I'm being treated unfairly? You know, that sort of suggestion. Or you can talk to your manager and say, this isn't working for me. Is there a way that that we can do something about that? So here, you know, agree to changes in workload of change of working that make it easier for you to cope. Are you satisfied in your workplace, basically, that your employees have a system in place where they can talk to their manager and say, I'm really struggling here. Can we look to change my workload or to change ways of working that make it easier for me to cope? One of the key things that is regularly on the agenda for employees is working from home. So that sort of idea, it's going to make it easier for me to work from home, and actually genuinely looking at that and being able to justify it as to why that isn't feasible full time. So your challenge is to empower employees to raise concerns and to be open to resolve conflict. So you want a robust and well communicated policy about your commitment to promote dignity and respect at work and the behaviours expected. And when we say well communicated, this might be through different sorts of forums. It might be, you might have, I have a client that has, they call it toolbox talks. And so they have their staff meetings, they pass on information about different things that are going on in that particular team through that. But they also regularly put on different sort of sessions on the different policies, just reminders about it, what it means, where someone can go to get help. Maybe there's an update to a policy, you say, please can you all read it? And that toolbox is not recorded as in filmed, but recorded as in there's sort of an agenda for that toolbox that you can then go back to as an employer and say, well, we have a policy, and then in the toolbox talks we regularly talk about the policy. Here you can see on this date all our managers were tasked with notifying their staff that they had to raise this, and we can see on this date all these managers did do that. So it's just a way of recording what you were doing as an organisation to promote tolerance and to promote dignity and respect. And that will make it much easier for you that if you have a rogue manager that does discriminate against someone, you can say, we put in place all the safeguards to ensure that that didn't happen in our workplace. We are not responsible for their behaviour. We will all say in the workplace bullying will not be tolerated, but it's accepting that feeling bullied is subjective. So looking at reasonable ways of resolving that bullying, and the response should not always be to resort to a formal investigation or a formal disciplinary or a formal grievance. There may be ways of exploring how somebody feels and trying to put in place measures to mean that they don't feel like that anymore without upsetting, without creating the conflict that comes with a formal process. Building an inclusive workplace climate, so positive workplace, positive relationship at work, open and collaborative management style, good teamwork and healthy interaction with the peers. So our suggestions, so training and guidance. So we're starting sort of top to bottom, ensure that senior leaders and managers role model and champion the correct behaviours. If you don't have your senior leaders that are open and collaborative and transparent and supportive, the managers under them are not going to be either, because they're going to take their stance from how they are treated. And ensure that your guidance is really clear on what is expected of everybody, and then you can rely on that to try and improve behaviours as you go along. Train your managers to manage people properly and manage people as individuals. So prevention is always better than cure. So intervene at an early stage if there are performance issues, or if there are conduct issues, or if there are issues with sickness, or if there is something that you see with respect to that individual that you are concerned about their welfare. Because if you leave it, it often snowballs into a much bigger thing, and then the instinct is to move to a formal process. But if you intervene at an early stage and show that you're supportive of your employees to get to improve, then they're more likely to react well to that. Get to know your team better, so you'll be aware of when things are going wrong to put a stop to them. Be aware of simmering tensions within employee teams, with employees, and find ways of facilitating, mediating outcomes to avoid that. This is come up in a number of ways recently, as I say, in terms of the gender critical debate, in terms of conflict in Israel and Palestine, and how people want to show their support of people within that region. There's different ways that there could be tensions in the workplace. None of them could be related to the work that people are doing, but it is still something that you want to try and manage. As managers, you don't want to think, well, you know, those people aren't getting on because they've got different belief systems. You want to see if there's a way of resolving conflict in a collaborative way. Acknowledge when a team member is causing stress to others and see if you can do something about that. Be clear of your expectations of team conduct, and try not to get involved in office politics or gossip. And I've seen a couple of cases recently where there has been Teams chats, you've had to disclose them in an employment tribunal, where managers have made an odd quip about somebody's behaviour, and it's got and people would just see that as gossip, and they see that as bullying, and it's so easy to do, and we're all human, but it is something that it comes back to that creating healthy workplace. Right, key takeaways. It is about the procedures and the training. If this new bullying right comes in, it is really difficult to manage. But if people don't bring bullying claims if they're happy in the workplace, so if you've got managers that understand their team, they will hopefully be able to perceive there is a risk that somebody is unhappy in the workplace, and try and deal with that head on in a supportive and sensitive way. It's not always going to be possible. There's always going to be a risk of these allegations coming out of nowhere, but it is something that you could implement. I would champion informal resolution. So build confidence in your employees to raise concerns immediately and to raise them informally to try and seek resolution. I'm not a big fan of the formal grievance. I appreciate we all have to have them in the workplace. It's in the ACAS code of conduct. You have them. Employers employment tribunals expect them. But ultimately, what it does is create more conflict. It creates more division sometimes, and often there are better ways of trying to resolve such matters. People should be encouraged, rewarded to play their part in making policies a reality and to challenge inappropriate behaviour. I think this is really important because I think often there will be issues within a team where everybody ignores the behaviour of a member in the team, and actually that's not necessarily appropriate either. So, you know, actually having a forum challenging inappropriate behaviour, having people where your employees believe that there is someone they can go and just chat to. And often, unfortunately, it's not the case that people feel they can do that with HR managers or their HR rep, not because the HR reps are not sensitive and supportive, because most people that I meet through my job are absolutely within that area, that domain. It's more that there's a perception that the HR person there is there to apply policies and there to support managers potentially. So trying to find a way, if there's a way of building that, closing that gap between potentially your HR team and your individuals, so they do feel they can come and raise matters, and it's going to be treated seriously. It's going to be investigated sensitively, maybe informally initially, to see if there's ways of resolving it. But if there are serious allegations of harassment, then it will be dealt with quickly and promptly, and people will be potentially believed. Now, most allegations of harassment are one word against another, and it's really difficult to know who to believe. But training your managers in if it is a formal process, investigating such matters is about training them to interview individuals and to make a finding. And sometimes that finding has to be based on their instinct. My instinct is, having spoken to them, that I believe the employee has been subject to harassment, and then justifying that belief, because employment law comes down to what is a reasonable belief, and is it reasonable to have that belief based on the information you had. And so that's the format that your managers need to look at. It may be that they don't believe it, but they've got to explain why they don't believe it. It may be that there's just no evidence. It may be that the evidence suggests that actually what they're arguing about is just they don't like being told what to do. You know, those sort of things come up regularly, but it is about your managers that have to deal with formal processes, making their decisions and justifying their decisions in a clear way so people understand how they've reached it. It's more likely to accept decisions if they can understand how they've been reached. Right, that's all I have to cover today.